Hi everyone. Today we're going to be looking at caching. So what is caching? Caching is a way of speeding up a website by saving the output of a normal website request or database request to a file and accessing that file directly in the future instead of having to run the normal sequence to display a web page. So for example, when WordPress displays a page on a site, a number of calls to the database are created in order to fetch the relevant information and display that to the user. What caching does is it allows WordPress to do that for the first time, and then it saves that output to a file. Every page load of that specific page thereafter is then referenced from a file instead of WordPress having to make all those database calls again. Reading from a file is far quicker and efficient than reading from a database. However, there are some drawbacks to this. Should you make any changes to your page, which obviously is stored in the database, most caching plugins will still reference that file and not display the latest information from the plugin. This is why you should clear the page cache every time you make changes to a specific page. Caching plugins can also cause issues with our plugins, so I'm going to take you through a couple of scenarios of how caching can make a user believe our plugin is not functioning as it should. First, let's look at how we know if a website is using a caching plugin. Okay, so what you do is you go to the web page here on the right, you right click and you say view page source, or you can just click Control U. Obviously this opens up the source. Many of you are comfortable with this, but if you go down, you can have a look here. Page caching using disk. We're using W3 total cache here, and we're using disk page caching, which means it's essentially writing to a file. So what it's done is it's taken all of this content, which was generated from WordPress, and a lot of the calls came from the database, and it writes that to a file, which then gets referenced over and over and over again. So it pretty much saves calling on the database all the time. So how does this affect WP Google Maps? If you go to the settings page, by default, when someone installs WP Google Maps, the database option is enabled. What that means is when we load the page with a shortcode that generates the map, we fetch the marker data straight from the database and we insert it as localized variables for JavaScript to use. You'll see the WPG Maps localized marker data, and it's got all the marker data within it. That then generates these markers here. So what happens is, because it's generated and pushed onto the actual page in a localized variable, caching plugins actually cache this data and then serve it again and again and again. So if you make any changes to the map, such as, let's get back there. Let's just add a marker. I've got 4 there. Refresh this page. We still got 3. And if you refresh here, nothing has changed. That's because it's cached. So what you need to do, obviously if you have login details for the client, or if you can just tell the client, they need to purge their cache. And there we have 4 again. Simple as that, but it can be very frustrating for the clients. Okay, but what you actually saw me do there was I purged the cache for the entire website. So I essentially cleared all cache, which is probably not the best option. So what you should do is you should go find the relevant page where the shortcode is on. In this instance, it's map. You can view it or edit it. Go to performance if you're using W3 total cache. Purge modules, page cache current page. That will just clear that cache file of this current page and rewrite it to be served over and over. Okay, let's take a look at how caching can affect WP Live Chat support. Apart from normal page caching, there are other instances of caching that are slightly more advanced, yet are in use by many plugins and websites. Another type of caching is object caching. Essentially, object caching takes certain calls to the database, such as get option, which is used 100 times in our plugins, and caches the value of that option for a set amount of time. What we have found is that if a user has object cache enabled, the options or settings in our plugin, such as the toggle switch to switch online and offline in chat, becomes cached. This becomes incredibly confusing for the user, and they may have switched themselves to offline, but the toggle doesn't change. As you can imagine, this can become very frustrating and generally leads to a lot of anger. Unfortunately, at the moment, there is no way around object caching other than asking the user to disable it or deleting a certain file. So over here you can see in W3 total cache, if you go to general settings, if you scroll down a little bit, the as object cache. By default, it's not enabled, but some people do enable it, and then you get issues. Okay, most GoDaddy installations force object caching on every WP installation via a special drop-in called object cache. A drop-in is a plugin that cannot be deactivated or deleted from within WordPress and can only be deleted via FTP. Deleting the object cache.php file will fix the issue, but you lose some of the caching mechanism. However, most users are not really aware of this drop-in and will not miss it, but always confirm with the plugin user if you can proceed with removing the drop-in. One last thing, you may be wondering why cache doesn't affect the actual chat box with WP Live Chat support since it's pushed to the page. Well, in the past we ran into a lot of issues with that, and we had to find a workaround because people were they were going online, the page would then get cached, and they would go offline, and the plugin would mark them as offline, but because the cached page showed them as online, people still thought they were online, and people got really upset. So what we had to do is we had to create a workaround, and what we did is we decided to fetch the chat box via Ajax. So when the page loads, or the JavaScript loads, the Ajax request gets fired, goes to the server and fetches that chat box, builds the HTML and brings it back, then inserts it onto the page. So that's how we got around the caching issue on WP Live Chat.